It is 39 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time as we turn our focus now on the oil and gas sector in South Africa. Dr. Ross Compton, who's Senior Director of Global Policy at EnerGeo Alliance, says South Africa's struggling economy could just get a major boost from a revitalized oil and gas sector. And this could be done by providing investor certainty. In the report, which is titled The Economic Benefits and Opportunities of Enhancing the Upstream Oil and Gas Sector in South Africa, Dr. Compton says developing the country's upstream resources, particularly in the areas of major gas finds off the, or rather gas finds off the Southern Cape, could be injecting billions into the GDP. They could also create thousands of jobs and strengthen the energy security. He now joins us on the line to unpack the report. Dr. Compton, welcome to Africa in Business. Good to have you with us. Let's start off perhaps with what the estimated economic contribution South Africa could realize by developing a competitive upstream oil and gas sector. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon, Thami. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for the introduction there. It's a great overview to the report that we've published, and as you say, in order to unpack some of the opportunity there, the report highlights a number of things regarding the potential in South Africa and from potential operations in Block 11B, 12B, just as an example. There's the potential to add the contribution of approximately 23 billion rand annually. And in terms of job creation, estimates show potential for up to around 20,000 jobs. And that would be a mixture of skilled and unskilled jobs. As you can appreciate, the supply chain for oil and gas is broad, and there is a need for some highly skilled jobs, but there's also an awful lot of support services required to support activities going on both onshore and offshore, of course. So there's a lot of potential there. And we see a lot of that happening across the border in Namibia, where they're a little bit further along, still in their very early exploration and appraisal phases, but far enough along that we're seeing some of those realizations in increases to GDP, increases to employment, and so on.
You make reference there to Namibia. When we look at the projected economic impact and economic contribution of South Africa's upstream oil and gas sector, as you've highlighted now, how do those compare with leading African producers, the likes of Nigeria, Angola, or even Mozambique?
It's probably a little early to say at the moment, but I think the potential is certainly there in a number of areas. So I've mentioned Block 11B, 12B to begin with, partly because it's sort of a bit further along in terms of the exploration that has happened there. But there's a lot of interest in the Orange Basin in particular, partly because it is that geological continuity, that shared resource, if you like, across the border with Namibia. And the work that has been undertaken in Namibia has done a lot to de-risk to a certain degree what is on the South African side. And so we can see that there's a lot of potential there, but there's a lot more work to be done before we can say with any certainty how that looks in relation to some of the others you mentioned there. But certainly a lot of potential, but a lot of work to be undertaken.
South Africa does tend to be a forerunner and front runner in many areas of development and progress. Why is it that in the area of exploration and production, as far as oil and gas investment are concerned, South Africa has lagged behind in comparison to some of the countries that you've mentioned, the Namibias, Mozambique and Ghana?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. I think it relates to a certain amount of uncertainty regarding the regulatory framework, and that's changing. The government is doing a lot to put in place the relevant frameworks for this, and there's some good things to report since the assent of the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Act earlier this year. That adds a layer of certainty over what came before. Industry is now waiting for the upstream regulations that will come on the back of that legislative act. And again, that will add further certainty for industry. They're currently in draft form, so we look forward to those coming into being in the near future. But I think some of the other areas you mentioned, Namibia in particular, if I stay with that, they've provided that certainty for operators and investment certainty for people to ensure that as they propose projects, as they get authorizations for their projects, they're able to undertake those activities and move forward through the development cycle. So it's really given that investment certainty, which is encouraging, of course, investment across the border or to some of those other countries that you mentioned.
You've mentioned some of the key reforms that would need to take place in order for investor confidence to enter a phase of uptick. How much of a role do incentives play, and what type of incentives do you believe are needed in order to attract that large-scale investment into upstream oil and gas exploration?
I think the key thing really is certainty, Thami, to be honest. It's the fiscal regime is comparable to others, so it's really about certainty for investment and having the surety that if you're getting an authorization for a project, that you're able to go forward, that the terms of some of those early authorization processes are unambiguous, and that timelines are being kept to, both on the regulatory side and of course in submissions from industry. So that really helps to move things forward. So it's not necessarily about incentives, it's more about creating certainty for industry to go forward. I think in many other cases the conditions are there. It's just getting that final piece of the puzzle to take things forward.
You speak about certainty, but I also hear within your answer a lack of confidence in a sense of what is said may not necessarily come to pass. Can you name perhaps scenarios that have helped to exacerbate this lack of confidence in the country?
Yeah, certainly. I think some of the lengthy appeals processes and the litigation have been a contributory factor to some of that uncertainty. And certainly they lower confidence in, as you say, being able to move forward with projects. So I think that's where some certainty around some of the ambiguities in the regulation need to be addressed, in order to lower the risk of some of those processes taking place. Of course, those are democratic processes, very much support that. But I think sometimes there is a need to identify some of the drawbacks and some of the holes in the litigation, in the regulation, that allow those to come forward all too easily. And I think that would really help address the situation.
And how far is South Africa in addressing some of these regulatory barriers?
Well, I think it remains to be seen. When we've got the regulations in place, we'll be, again, that bit more further forward. We'll have more certainty for investors to consider their next steps. And of course, to this point, the projects that have been proposed or undertaken have fallen under the older regime, under the Mineral Resources Act. So once all of those pieces are in place, the next phase of project work will come under the new regime, under the Upstream Petroleum Act. So it'll be interesting to see how things develop once that is all in place.
So wait and see approach. Dr. Ross Compton, we thank you so much for your insight and for taking us through some of what came out of that report.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That's Dr. Ross Compton, he's Senior Director of Global Policy at the EnerGeo Alliance, on a report that was put together titled The Economic Benefits and Opportunities of Enhancing the Upstream Oil and Gas Sector in South Africa, highlighting the many opportunities that exist for investment in exploration in this sector, and how neighboring countries like Namibia, Mozambique, and even West African countries like Ghana have benefited from this, and why South Africa is lagging behind some of the regulatory barriers that need to be adjusted. But as he sums it up at the end, as it stands, it remains a wait and see.